Windblown is in fact an action, single or multiplayer roguelike. How did it come about? Well, originally, Dead Cells put Motion Twin, the developer, on the map, an excellent roguelike Metroidvania platformer. But that doesn't mean Motion Twin wanted to make the same identical game. So when they announced their new title, Windblown, a roguelike action and an isometric style viewpoint, it was greeted with a bit of excitement and no end of trepidation. Though that's a bit like being pissed your new girlfriend doesn't look like the last one, even though she's awesome. At some point, sure, you could go and date the never-ending escalator belt of sisters, but it's bound to get boring sometime. Motion Twin thought the same thing, so they decided to make some stunning departures. But they also hoped to keep the same Dead Souls magic alive, at least when it comes to their gameplay chops. Did they? We will see. Sit on back for my preview, relax, subscribe, or leave a comment. In this game, for years, people have lived peacefully on a thing called the Ark. It's a floating village outside a huge anomaly called the Vortex. Ignoring really bad strategy of living settings aside, if the name fooled you, yeah, this is not going to end well. And now you and two friends can go out and start taking down the enemies known as the Sentinels that are pouring out of the Vortex, even as it slowly eats away at the world. Leapers, which are the players, battle the Vortex's Sentinels in a gameplay loop where players dash, fight, die, upgrade, and repeat. And just like games of this type, each time you die, you start over with only a couple different items from the initial set that you end up getting as permanent upgrades. Now, not glazing this, but it is one of the best, most flashy, catchy looking games I've seen all year. The dash move just rips, cracking across floating landscapes from moment to moment to moment. Then it opens up around you, dashing between hanging islands, beneath waterfalls and crystalline formations, then dropping onto lower levels and facing enemies that blow globs of explosive acid or turn into platform zipping and ripping, dash drilling bad guys. But right now it's a breath of fresh air, a brighter neon look to it, a mix of colors like Ratchet and Clank and the angles of Bastion in the moment to moment. It's like it was made by the developers who were afraid of anything that doesn't look like candy bought in single packets, the Skittles of graphics design. And I like it so far, especially in the format like this, because I admit we have sharp-edged realistic graphics, we have high-res pseudo-photo-style graphics where every zit, rosacea, flare-up, and lip flake can be seen by a mile away, but I'm also all for a game that looks like it was made by a 7-year-old trying to explain his dreams to his parents. There's something about blasting between locations with that dash, and while the camera's angle is technically lower than I expected when I jumped in, this shows new locations in a very unique way, flowing out below you, and it's pretty damned cool. And the speed mostly always feels good. That being said, it does have a unique and sometimes off-putting art style, especially around the characters themselves. They grow on you, but especially those that you interact with and your own avatars are a little bit hit and miss so far. When it comes to performance, this thing sings right now. While it doesn't have a lot of settings, it's not one of those titles that just has low, medium, and high and anti-aliasing, it's also not deep with them. Doesn't seem to matter though, because regardless of the number of enemies scooting across silky smooth grasslands of floating islands and frantic fits to finish my life, the game never missed a beat, well over 100 FPS at all times at 4K maxed. Of course, that's on a 4090, and you might say, KARAK, dude, a 4090 is what sheiks and pimps and millionaires all have in common. And while I would say, aren't those all the same thing, I'd also say that a 2080 handled this with incredible ease, and the performance curve so far in early access is pretty much exactly as I would hope for. Your mileage is going to vary, just like graphics, art styles in different games. Talking about the audio for just a second, there's no real voice, but there's excellent high bitrate samples for slashing, bashing, and trashing enemies, and so far, the different sound effects work quite well. Because of the viewpoint and the fact that most of the time you can see every enemy on the screen, the 3D separation and sound effects aren't necessarily noticeable. What is noticeable is the music. Now, this is more beaty than I expected, sometimes more old school, softer, and all about the typical themes. Other times, and especially in the later spots of the early access, closer to hard electro beats. However, in the later section, there is also a wicked, almost John Wick 1 dance club theme that beats out, and when hit, the music thumbs its nose at the higher end and throbs down to a muted beat where you can just hear the lowest of the low, as well as a unique, almost loose guitar pluck that can barely be heard over the action. I was digging that, but especially the hit effect layers when that begins to happen can be a little bit confusing. Then again, I was a mechanical bird-like thing in what looked like a karate gi with a metal tail, so making sense, doesn't seem like this game's highest priority. What is a high priority for the game is the gameplay, especially from these developers. The game starts out with a quick cutscene and then leaps into teaching you the action, and you're a leaper, so that makes sense. Leapers possess a unique ability to absorb the memories of fallen warriors, unlocking special powers that allow you to customize and enhance all of your gear as you continue to go through the game again and again. As you progress, you'll unlock more abilities, leading to an ever-expanding array of different combinations depending on what other skills and weapons you're using. And some of these can become permanent. So for example, you might unlock a secondary weapon where you normally wouldn't have it. So when you start the level, that secondary weapon is waiting for you to pick up right from the start. Windblown bills itself as lightning-fast action roguelike, and it plays just like that. It also plays a lot like any mix of action RPGs and a bit like a dashy old-style Gauntlet. The creators of Dead Cells do know their action, even if the exact setup isn't the same. Now, so far, combat is a blast. It's got 2 weapon slots as well as a number of trinkets you can get that add special powers. At least that's what I got so far. And you have the add-on special powers like burning or freezing or bleeding. As a roguelike, this is a system that also has that permanent progression item that you can occasionally buy or get in the game that carries over, as I said before. When it comes to the weapons themselves, you can equip up to 2 each with a distinct playstyle, though again, understand that the combos aren't necessarily complex in and of themselves. For example, you might have a crossbow and a huge heavy sword, or a kitchen knife and knuckle blades. Each weapon allows for you to unleash what are called alter attacks. These are super-powered hidden abilities that change the flow of combat when moving between them. So you might do a couple attacks with one, you get an indicator on the screen, and switch to the other weapon, and those can be vital in all kinds of battles. The game loves to also throw weird combinations at you. Groups of enemies with ranged laser cannons that can transform into giant steel balls and roll around the level like those battle droids in Star Wars, only actually useful this time. And just when you get accustomed to those kind of enemies, the game throws some weird paddle-propelled giant fist with a laser penis thing that circles around it like a low-hanging lightsaber. And that thing can punch you into sleepy time faster than Jimmy Fallon's skit, especially if you're not prepared. My time with the early access version did prove a couple things. The first is that Windblown's enemies are mobile as hell. You'll be bounding between levels like 2 dogs playing in a living room, bouncing off the couches and the chairs and the walls and the lamps and leaping between spots to try to get openings, with the enemies doing the exact same. While they won't chase you all the way through a level, in the small spots you interact with them, it happens consistently and it feels great. The next is the game's core combat rests within dodging to create an opening and then thinking on your feet. Sometimes the opening you want for a heavy hit combo against one enemy is going to result in you being shot from behind by another. So you're consistently dashing and moving, trying to figure out ways to dole out the hurt while not getting hurt yourself. You can pull off powerful 3-hit combos, finishing with a devastating slam that sends your enemy crashing to the ground, shattering them and earning you currency to upgrade your abilities. But when groups of enemies come around, short hits and moving or combo hits and alt switching for huge power attacks can pull you subtly into engaging in risk. And I really did find that cycle absolutely dopamine inducing. I would consistently get in a battle, think that I had it handled, another enemy was there, and decide, you know what, I'm just going to hit this guy one more time in front of me, and I would do so, and right then the other shot from the other enemy would hit me. It's a good bit of balancing even so far for an early access game. Lastly, the game's core conceits of mixing and matching gifts, trinkets, and weapons is not only the strength of it, but it's also just diverse as hell. Even in early access, there's like 10 plus weapons to experiment with, each allowing you to combo those primary and secondary attacks. While all this chaos and anarchy and combat sounds good, mostly it is, I did find a couple things about the early access that gave me pause. The first is the character design. While the worlds are magnificently fantastical with odd crystal formations, waterfalls, and almost Sonic the Hedgehog 3D aesthetic to them, and I mean that in all the best goddamn ways possible, it wasn't easy to ignore that the enemy design is weird. And by weird, I mean a little bit basic. It's hard to tell if the fiction is being presented in the form, if the Vortex's enemies are made manifest as they attack the lands, but that same weird lightsaber-wielding backpedal-propelled fist that's a BDSM fan's nightmare, it just looks cobbled together. Many of them do. The dual-wielding table saw-bladed robots attack that you would expect them, with no real changes or surprises so far on board. And that was the same with all of them. But since this is very early, I need to see more and see what the game is trying to present in terms of worldview, and also how it's preparing new players versus people who are super experienced at it. And while I love the dashing, it can create a couple oddities. For example, the normal run speed, which isn't fast, becomes almost a negative in the game, with you dashing everywhere, even to get across long empty sections of a level, resulting in a weird herky-jerky feeling to the movement, which ultimately actually means looking at the world during those times, seeing the celestial formations below you floating in open 3D space, is actually a bit less evocative than it could be. And you'll probably end up seeing that in the trailers as well as the footage here. When it comes to the fun factor, though, despite those issues, I did like what I played. Choosing a gift after taking out a semi-boss feels like a pretty big get, especially because both you and the enemies do some good amounts of damage. The world's gorgeous, the combat, when you're deep into it, requires some thinking, some quick reflexes, and smart use of what you brought in, and that includes up to 2 friends if you decide to play it that way. The roguelike element of it so far isn't really there yet, meaning it's not as mature as it probably needs to be to make you feel like it's anything other than a general tagline. If Dead Cells is any indication, these guys will get there. The game comes out in early access soon on Steam, and I suggest you check out more videos to see if it's for you, because there was a lot to like here. Speaking of checking out my videos, you can do so October. We got the big video list. It's already out, discussing just some of the games coming out this month, as well as last reviews I did, including Dead Rising Remaster and Frostpunk 2. Get a chance, check out the Patreon, join us. No matter what you do, make sure you do one of the two. Comment, give a thumbs up. Peace out.